I just came back from a thing I had to do, and I saw this sign on the way back. Um, I was walking across my college campus, and I saw the sign saying "Socialist Workers of the World Unite." Tiny little sign, probably about a foot high, right? Like a little, like I don't know. I guess you call it a dipod, not a tripod, but like a I don't know exactly what you call it, but but basically think of like the slippery when wet signs that you get that they put out when they mop a floor in a mall or something in a public space, right? It was like one of those style signs, and it had "Socialist Workers of the World Unite," and it said, what was it? Genuine socialism and all this other bullcrap. By the way, no one was there. Like, just so you know, it's not a popular idea. And it's not like I'm in a really conservative area or anything. I'm in one of the blue enclaves. I am in a kind of you know, red region, like I'm in upstate New York, and that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say where I am. I still haven't said where I am. But the county that I'm in and the college that I go to is in a blue enclave. Like, most of the people going to this college are from sort of this area, which is a blue area. Now, again, generally the entirety of upstate New York, for the most part, you got a couple areas, right? So you got like near Plattsburgh. It's kind of a swing, kind of swings back and forth. The county up there, whatever county Plattsburgh's in, I don't know. Onondaga County, which is Syracuse, which swings blue every election cycle. Although the outskirts of Onondaga County are significantly less liberal than Syracuse itself, but Syracuse and its suburbs have enough population to kind of flip it the other way. Rochester, whatever county that's in, goes blue. Buffalo goes blue. Not just the county Buffalo's in, but some of the surrounding areas, because Buffalo is such a big metro. Ithaca is actually the most liberal city in New York, and it goes super hard left because you got Cornell University and you got Ithaca College, which are both very. It's a college town, so it goes blue. It actually, Ithaca by percentage votes more Democrat than New York City, so it is literally the most Democrat city in New York. I know cities are different. In New York, you have Village, you got Hamlet, which is unincorporated, Village, Town, City. A town is like an area of a county, and there could be villages within it, and the cities is separate from any town, but it is still within a county. It's very confusing and very stupid when you first come across it. And it's always stupid, but some old setup that they have from back when the Dutch were here and it was New Amsterdam. It's always been that way. They've kept it that way for a long, long time. Anyway, that's kind of how it works here. So seeing that sign is not like when I don't see people crowded around that sign, and I think the person I saw standing out there, I wasn't sure if that person was with the sign or if they were just talking to someone on the sidewalk, but I think that person was the person with the sign. One person was talking with this guy. One person. I thought I was on this leftist college campus and in a very leftist area, and I the majority of my campus is minority, which means it's probably majority left. Well, not the majority of my campus, but a significant portion, right? Around half, probably 45%, 50% of the college is of minority groups or whatever. Maybe more, maybe 60%. It's around half. And we're all young. I thought this new statistic. I thought this. Well, it's not a new statistic. It's a statistic that gets repeated every single year. I thought half of all young people were socialist, and I thought that Generation Z was, and the millennial generation was full of all these lefty, crazy socialists. Okay, let's break down that statistic. Here's why that statistic is BS. Who are they asking? Let me tell you something about my generation of people and the millennials. I'm closer to the millennial generation, so I know a little bit more about them than the older. The older generations always know less about the generations beneath them than the younger generations know about the generations above them. It's weird. Well, it's kind of like this. The older generation knows a lot about their offspring, whatever generation they bore, right? So who had the millennials? The baby boomers. Who had Gen Z? Gen X. Right? That's kind of how it works. However, they don't know the in-between people. So, Gen X had us. Well, I mean, my mother's technically the very last of the baby boomers, pretty much. Because I was she had me later than most people have kids. But the fact remains is that, but my father's Gen X. Most of our parents had us, because parents have been having kids later since probably the 50s, right? So it used to be you have a kid like right out of high school. Right out of high school, you get married and you have a kid. You're 19, 20, you already got a kid. You already got one kid under your belt, right? But in the middle of the last century, it kind of changed, and now it's more like 25, right? Like 24, 25. The average age to have a kid right now is about 25. So our parents, a lot of our parents had us in their mid, maybe even late 20s. And so none of the millennials are really the offspring of our of Gen X. There's a few, but for the most part, they're the offspring of the baby boom generation, which also had their kids in their mid-20s. So the baby boomers don't understand Gen X. And you see how that kind of happened, right? Generation X is not quite as liberal as, the millennials. And of course, it also has to do with age. You become more right-wing as you grow older, typically. But even if you were to go back to their time, they still weren't as left. And that's because Gen X was raised by the Great Generation of World War II, right? So that's kind of how it goes. Now, this may seem like I'm rambling, but this all makes sense. We were raised by Gen X, Generation Z. Now, because of that, Generation X understands us. They don't understand the millennials. So they think we're like the millennials and us must be similar. Right? Because they see us and they go, oh yeah, I raised that generation. And they see the millennials and they go, wait, they came before that? Then that means my kids are being influenced by slightly older people, right? Because they're still closer to us in age. And therefore, my kids are going to identify with those people. Wrong. Yes, of course, people who are slightly older are always going to influence you, especially when you're like, in your preteen years or in your teenage years. But we're adults now. Okay? People my age, now granted, there are still, that looks terrible. There's still younger people in Generation Z that are still in high school. That are still behind me, right? So, here, let me move. So, you have Alpha Gen, which is kids 0 to 6 or 0 to 7, somewhere in there. Those are the ones behind Generation Z. So, technically, like some of my younger relatives who don't know anything about politics are part of Generation Z. However, that doesn't, you can't say, oh, well, Generation Z is a bunch of liberals, because most of Generation Z hasn't emerged as a voting bloc yet. There's most of Generation Z is still too young to vote. Let me tell you something about my generation. We don't care about politics. I do. But generally speaking, my generation doesn't care about politics because politics has never done anything for them. They've never... Their life doesn't revolve around that. Their life revolves around things like video games and vaping and, school, right? We haven't gone outside as much. But at the same time, our parents were Generation X, which means we weren't coddled as much either. So you get this weird dynamic where you have a generation that doesn't go outside as much, but has somehow experienced bullying. Is somehow got this, it's this weird dynamic where like you got people who are tough intellectually, but not physically. That's the weird dynamic with our generation. Is you got people who have been exposed to all kinds of different opinions because of the internet, grew up with the internet, and have had their ideas challenged, and have been called all kinds of names, and don't really care because they're used to it, but yet they have very little experience with hard labor. My generation's probably has the highest amount of college attendees or potential college attendees, right? Because more and more people are going to college. And you see all this, and then you have these statistics that come out and say, oh, half of all young people are in favor of socialism. Generation Z, it's not true. It's not true. Number one voting issues for Generation Z are racial violence, healthcare, and equality, or something stupid like that, or police brutality, racial equality, and I don't know, healthcare. And then for the millennials, it was climate change, healthcare, and right there, you can see that we're actually not as far left as the left, because climate change if that is on your top 3 before police brutality, or what was it? Racial equality or whatever. If that's on your list before that, then you got a problem, right? Potentially, there are people getting gunned down in the streets because cops are, this is the potential argument, right? That because cops are ill-trained, they're bad at their jobs, and a lot of them are just plain old racists, right? That's the argument. But the millennials are more worried about climate change. Seems like your priorities are a little out of whack. Already, that sounds like something a leftist would do. Which means the millennial generation is already, by those standards, further left than Gen Z. But on top of that, the statistic is full of crap. Because you're trying to quiz people on their politics who are young, when most young people don't care about politics. So the people that you're getting that actually care about politics, yeah, half of the people that actually engage in this crap. We're not talking like people who just go out and vote. We're talking people who actually think on this stuff. Yeah, half of them are going to be socialists. Because leftists tend to be more political than conservatives. That's just a fact. The truth is that if you're on the right, you're fun to be around. So you don't always talk about politics. I'm a very political person, but I don't talk about politics with my friends a lot. Very rarely. Or I'll allude to it. Why? Because I don't care. Now, we don't shy away from the subject completely, right? We're not like some of the older generations, like, you can't talk about religion or politics because we're at the dinner table, and never bring up anything that interests you because God forbid. No, I totally disagree with that. I do think that you should limit what you say and all that. You can self-censor because there's some things that are just inappropriate, but no, a lot of Gen Z does talk about politics. We just don't make a big deal out of it because it doesn't really rule our lives. I'll tell you, a lot of Generation Z is libertarian-esque. They don't know they're right-wing because they just don't care. They're the types of people, they're like, yeah, I don't really care about LGBTQ or whatever, because they grew up with LGBTQ. They grew up pretty much after everyone got their rights. You know? Like, yeah, okay, you could say, oh, gay marriage didn't get put into law until 2012. Okay, or was it? No, 2015 or something like that, whatever. Okay, fine. But most of us still aren't out of high school. You understand that? A lot of us are still, there's some people in my generation still in elementary school. They're not going to remember a time before, gay marriage was legal or whatever. It's things like that. So that's why that statistic is complete garbage, because most of us aren't political. Most of us aren't going to sign on to your stupid survey. And actually, if you look at, if you look at the politics, here's how you can gauge the politics of Generation Z. What do they watch? What do they view on the internet? Look at Steven Crowder's audience. The majority of his audience is people under the age of 35. A huge portion, maybe the largest, is Gen Z. Explain that to me. You can't. And he's not the only one. Paul Joseph Watson. His audience is a lot of young men. By the way, young women too are starting to get into this, which is rare. It's not normal to see a lot of young women engage in this stuff and to be interested in conservative voices. You're starting to see that. Young women gravitate towards people like Roaming Millennial and Lauren Southern and people like that, right? Or because they feel kind of left out, and their boyfriends are more conservative, and they're like, hey, what is this thing? And they want to get interested in it. And so now you're seeing more female conservative commentators and stuff. The point is that this statistic it's a scam. It's a scare. They're trying to scare us into thinking all hope is lost so they can maintain power. That's the bottom line. And this video has gone way too long, and I gotta use the restroom. So y'all have a good one.